morning. It is Friday, March the 18th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, the Star-Spangled Banner, and the Pledge of Allegiance, we will have the I Dare You Gambit, no free lunch, public servants, work for government, pay, and benefits. All that and more when I come back. Thank you. Now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for March the 18th. You will defeat the spirits of pride and rebellion. Do not let your hearts become filled with pride, for to the proud I will surely unleash my judgment. If you hang on to your pride, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who say to yourself, "Who can bring me down to the ground?" Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down. But my humble servants will defeat the spirit of pride, and I will be their deliverer. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 25. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18. Psalm 17, chapter 11. And Isaiah chapter 1, verse 20. Prayer declaration. Lord, let me be clothed with humility. Let all spirits rooted in pride or rebellion come out in the name of Jesus. To fear the Lord is to hate evil, and therefore I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. I will walk in the way of righteousness along the paths of justice. I will clothe myself with humility toward others, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for March the 18th. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious and realistic. He is the person that understands that culture is the foundation for politics. He acknowledges a benevolent universe. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Thank you, thank you. What are the tactics in support of the strategy to rid America of socialist influence? The long-term tactics are to be a true conservative, talk like a conservative, act like a conservative, dress like a conservative, and think like a conservative. The short-term tactics are rhetorical. True conservatives need to win all of the arguments. That means don't prove a negative. Don't take their word for it. Don't be neutral, and ask plenty of questions. Thank you, thank you. What is the true conservative strategy for defeating socialists in this country? Socialists must be driven from positions of power, and since it is lefty counterculture that provides the foundation for their political success, true conservatives must resist left-wing counterculture and promote normal American culture. By changing our culture, we will change our politics. And by changing the culture, we mean you need to get married, have a family, and raise your children. Thank you, thank you. What are the true conservative political priorities? Number one, the abolition of abortion throughout the land. Number two, to make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Number three, the immediate decertification of all public employee unions. Number four, the immediate assignment of criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. Number five, the immediate repeal of the so-called Patriot Act. Number six, the immediate repeal of all so-called emergency dictator laws. Thank you, thank you. And one of the tactics that the left likes to use, one of the rhetorical / psychological tactics that the left likes to use is something I call the I Dare You Gambit. And they use it typically they use it typically, let's say, in politics and with, let's say, appointments. For instance, the Biden administration nominates Kamala Harris to be the vice president and comes out and maybe explicitly says, I'm nominating this person because she's female or because she's black. Or in the case of the Supreme Court nomination, I'm going to pick a black Supreme Court justice. And basically what he's telling the Republicans is, I dare you to object. I dare you to object. Now, in the case of Kamala Harris, you can object on the basis not of qualification, but of experience, that she lacks the proper experience in order to have that position. And you can tell just by the way that she acts, spending all of her time giggling through her way through press conferences. And so she's not, she's qualified, but she's not prepared. That's the best way to put it. She is ill prepared for the job. So you can go ahead and make the objection. But the problem is for the Republicans is that they're so scared of being called a racist. They're so scared of being called a misogynist that they say nothing. They say absolutely nothing. And the problem with saying absolutely nothing is that you're giving tacit approval for this particular nomination. And in any situation in which the left is playing this gambit, if you say nothing, you're indicating your tacit approval of whatever it is that the left is doing. And you don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, you must not do that. Those are the areas where we need to defeat the left, you and I, in conversations that we have with our coworkers, etc. And all you have to do is you just stay away from the race angle of this. You don't go out and say, well, I object because you shouldn't be nominating people on the basis of their race. You leave that part of it alone and talk about either their qualifications or their preparedness. Thank you, thank you. And now there's no free lunch. The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. To the naive mind that can conceive of order only as the product of deliberate arrangement, it may seem absurd that in complex conditions, order and adaptation to the unknown can be achieved more effectively by decentralizing decisions, and that a division of authority will actually extend the possibility of overall order. Yet that decentralization actually leads to more information being taken into account. F.A. Hayek. The irony must not be lost on us. Those who not only do not claim to have adequate knowledge in the details of what they seek to control, but demonstrate their ignorance and inadequacy consistently for all to see, are the loudest proponents of granting the authority to control economic affairs to disinterested third parties. And perhaps I am too focused on their disinterest, the lack of skin in the game, alignment, incentive, and knowledge, and not focused enough on the lack of competence. Choose your poison. And that was There's No Free Lunch. Thank you, thank you. And now, Chapter 1, Meet the Shadowbosses, from the book The Shadowbosses by Mallory Factor. The scorpion wanted to cross a river, but he was a poor swimmer. So he begged a nearby frog for a ride across the river. "Why would I let you ride on my back?" the frog responded. "You are a scorpion, and surely you will sting me." "If I were to sting you," the scorpion replied haughtily, "we'd both drown, since I can't swim." The frog saw the logic of the situation and agreed. The scorpion crawled aboard the frog's back, and they started across the river. Halfway across, the scorpion stung the frog. As the paralyzed frog began to sink, he turned to the scorpion bewildered. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "You fool! Now we'll both drown." "I am a scorpion," the scorpion answered. "It is my nature to sting." And they both drowned. Today, we are the frog. Government employee unions are the scorpions. If we allow them to stay on our backs much longer, they will sting us and we will all drown. And like the trusting frog, we're letting them. Government employee unions should be expected to do what these unions do, demand more and more from our government until they bankrupt our nation and us. And our job is to refuse them. It is up to us to save our poor nation from the scorpion sting that we all know is coming in the middle of the river. Public servants become public masters. 2 generations ago, there were public-minded government servants. Most government employees took real pride in their work. Their common goal was to build and staff a government that served the people well. Before government employee unions came on the scene, government employees understood that service meant sacrifice in terms of pay. Sure, you wouldn't get rich working a government job, but you'd have a lifetime job with a good pension at the end, and you'd get to make a difference. Working for the government was a privilege, and you were really working for your fellow citizens. But now, far fewer government employees approach their jobs as a privilege to serve. What changed? Labor unions came along, unionized many government employees, and drastically increased what a government employee could expect to receive in pay and benefits. Now, as an aside, he says, labor unions came along. Well, they didn't just come along. Labor unions were brought about. Somebody or some bodies made them happen. Now, most forms of public service are more profitable than working in the private sector. The government employee unions also trained government employees to demand ever higher pay and never-ending benefits, all funded by their fellow citizens. To be clear, we shouldn't begrudge individual government employees for what they get in pay and benefits from the government. As we wrote this book, we even thought more than a few times that we should go out and apply for government jobs ourselves. We understand that government workers don't make the system, they just benefit from it. And again, as an aside, wrong. Of course they make the system. Without them, there would be no system. Back to the book. But make no mistake, the culture of public service has changed from a focus on giving back to a focus on getting. And through their incessant focus on extracting more from the employer, unions have encouraged government workers to consider their jobs as an entitlement, not a privilege. Many Americans, including Tea Party supporters, are angered by the decline of true public service. According to Tea Party advocate Donna Wiesner-Keene, Tea Party members are loyal tax-paying citizens, but their anger begins with the lack of value received for taxes. As an aside, it's an excellent point. The true conservative isn't as concerned about how high the tax rates are, et cetera, et cetera. What's most important is, what are we getting for our taxes? Are we getting value? Back to the book. The transformation of government worker from asset to liability of the people's government to the union's government. With this crucial change, government employee unions have been able to unite all net tax receivers into a huge special interest group that is focused on growing the government. Net tax receivers are those Americans whose income comes from the government one way or another, as salary, welfare benefits, and subsidies. Don't government employees pay taxes? Of course they do, but it isn't close to the amount they receive in salary and benefits. And, after all, they're really just paying back tax dollars they've already received from you. They give the government a cut of the pie they just took from your stove. This doesn't make government employees bad people, and many government workers surely give good service in exchange for their salary, but whether government workers work hard for their money or not, it doesn't change the fact that they are dependent on government to earn their living and are paid with taxpayer dollars. And an aside, yes, it does. It does make not government people, but government public employee union people are bad people. They know what's going on. There's no reason to believe that they have been, for instance, hoodwinked, that their unions have lied to them, for instance. They know exactly what's going on. They know where their money comes from. They know that they're engaged in a conflict of interest, the interests of the union versus the interests of the people. They know that, and yet they persist. And that persistence makes them a bad person. They don't have to stay that way. They can go out and clamor for the decertification of all public employee unions and go back to being civil servants. Back to the book. This mammoth special interest group of net tax receivers is represented by the Democrat Party. Whether individual net tax receivers are liberal or conservative, it is the Democrat Party that supports their personal interests in keeping government large and growing it bigger. On the other side is a dwindling group of people who actually pay the taxes that keep the other group afloat. How much longer are taxpayers going to be able to support the weight of the net tax receivers? Back in a minute. Thank you, and you should work for the government. Once unions organized government workers, the earlier pay gap between government and private sector workers closed. Then the gap expanded in the other direction. Government service is now far more lucrative than private sector work ever has been or probably ever will be. If you get a government job, you can be set for the rest of your life. Above market salary, great health benefits, and virtually unlimited job security while you are working, followed by early retirement and a generous and steady guaranteed pension until your death. The smartest among you who didn't know this before reading this book will put the book down right now and go apply for a government job. Michelle Obama, our First Lady, says, don't go into corporate America. Become teachers, work for the community, be social workers, be a nurse. Those are the careers that we need, and we're encouraging our young people to do that. Michelle Obama captures the message that we are all given about government service, that America needs more government workers to serve our nation. But is it really true anymore? How much service does our nation really need? And are we paying our government employees too much? Back in a minute. Thank you. Paying government employees. Economists have shown that government workers are overpaid compared with private sector workers, but it still remains a much debated question. Unions and some liberals argue that government employees still are not paid enough because they are so much more qualified than private sector workers. Federal government workers averaged over twice the salary and benefits that an average private sector worker makes. Federal government employees average a stunning $126,141 annually in salary and benefits. And how many federal government workers do you think make more than $100,000 in salary alone before overtime and benefits? 10,000? 20,000? 50,000? No. Actually, there were 459,016 federal workers making more than $100,000 in salary alone. Over 1 in 5 of all federal civil service workers. We can't possibly need that many highly paid government workers to run our federal government, even if they are uber qualified. One of the best detailed comparisons of full-time federal government workers and private sector workers was undertaken by James Shirk of the Heritage Foundation. His report shows that federal workers earn an average of 22% more in cash salary than a comparable private sector worker. Controlling for major factors like age, education, race, and location. Pile on all other retirement, health, and other benefits federal workers receive, and you have a huge gap between federal government and private workers. Federal workers receive total compensation of 30 to 40% above and beyond their observable skills, Shirk found. Other reports have shown that federal government workers at the low end of the pay scale experience the greatest premium over private sector workers. Chris Edwards of the Cato Institute shows that state and local government workers made, on average, 34% more in salary and 70% more in benefits than private sector workers. With that knowledge, why would anyone want to make the sacrifice required to work in the private sector? Job for life. And then there is a job security that comes with being a government worker. Ronald Reagan once stated, "A government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth." He was making the important point that once our government creates a new government program, it is very hard to get rid of it. The same could be said of hiring a government employee. Once hired, they are rarely, if ever, fired. At almost all government jobs, you would have to work pretty hard to be fired. Drug use on the property, embezzlement, murder, that kind of thing. Businesses fire their workers 3 times as often as the federal government. Once you've been on the job with the government a few years, there's almost no chance that you'll be fired or laid off. In fact, there is really only one way that you will be separated from your apparently God-given right to continue holding your federal job: death. At many federal agencies, death is more common than getting fired. The corpse from Weekend at Bernie's is probably still sitting at his desk, drawing federal pay. Here's an easy impartial test to determine whether working for the government is a good deal. How often do government workers voluntarily quit their jobs compared to the private sector? If government workers are underpaid, they'd probably quit their jobs more than private sector workers. But if they're overpaid, they would probably hold on to those valuable jobs more than people in the private sector. So do government workers quit? Sure, but not very often. Government workers practically never quit their jobs. Once employed by the government, state and local workers quit at 1/3 the rate of private sector workers. Federal government workers quit at even less often, at only 1/8 the rate of private sector workers. Government workers seem to either die at their government-issued desks or, more frequently, on the links in Florida, living off their guaranteed pensions. Why would anyone in their right mind ever give up a deal that good? Back in a minute. Thank you, thank you. Pension jackpot. Retirement is where the real payoff comes, and it comes quicker for government workers than for the rest of us. Government workers are generally able to retire with 30 years of service at age 55 or even earlier, at a full pension for life. In contrast, only 20% of private sector workers get this type of traditional defined benefit pension from their employer. Almost all business workers have to depend on a retirement plan based on their own contributions and modest contributions from their employer, their Social Security payments, and any other savings to fund their retirement. And to receive full Social Security benefits, these workers now have to wait until they are 66 or 67, depending on their year of birth. Retirement security is very difficult to achieve for most American workers, except for the most successful, and of course, except for government workers. The average New York City police officer, for example, can retire after only 22 years of service, often in his early 40s. An officer who retires as a captain can expect to receive upwards of $92,000 per year in retirement benefits, costing the city nearly $3 million during his retirement. Of course, we appreciate our police officers. They put their lives at risk to keep us safe, but no matter how much we appreciate them, we also have to realize that retired government workers in all areas of service are bringing our government's house down and foisting huge burdens on the next generation of Americans. Now, how many Americans do you think have the $3 million in retirement savings it would take to fund that police officer's pension we were just discussing? Unfortunately, not too many. If you want to see how much you'd collect in pension if you were a government employee, the Manhattan Institute has a handy calculator at calculateyourpublicpension.com, which shows how much you would collect on a state-by-state basis. Try it. You'll be so shocked that you might actually consider trading in your corporate job or your small business for the best benefits of government work. Although there are differences between pensions available at the federal, state, and local levels, most government workers get a pension based on at least 60% of their last working salary. Since pension income is generally based on average salary from the last 3 working years of his career, the government worker can jack up his overtime in his last years on the job to boost, even double, the amount of his pension. And it gets better. In some states, government workers who have hit retirement age can retire and get hired back at the same job and earn another government salary on top of their pension. It's 1 for the price of 2. And that is the about half of chapter 1 of the book, the Shadowbosses, and by Melody Factor. And again, it's all about government employee unions and how they are draining our bank accounts, busting the budget, and that we're really getting no value. This is a good argument to make, but it only is a supplementary. This is what I call the practical or the pragmatic argument. We shouldn't have public employee unions because they're too expensive and because they're inefficient or whatever. The problem with making those kinds of arguments is that the left is always going to have a practical or pragmatic response. If you say they're too expensive, the left simply says, we'll raise taxes. We'll tax the rich, for instance. If you say that they're inefficient, then they say then we will have reforms that will increase the efficiency. Now you're stuck. Okay, because they've answered your objection, now you have to go along with public employee unions for sure. The argument to make is the argument they can't answer, which is that public employee unions are inherently corrupt. You can't work for 2 masters. You can't work for the union and work for the people at the same time. It's one or the other, but not both. Thank you, thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that is spiritual. He's the man that seeks consensus. He's subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He is informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you, thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to tune in to the John and Ken Show, which is an excellent example of how true conservatives communicate. It's a radio show that's on KFI AM 640 from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the evening, Monday through Friday. And that's Pacific time. So that's an excellent show to listen to. And other than that, until next time, remember to be honest, to be smart, to be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.